Welcome to The Cop and the Shrink, a podcast exploring mental health, law enforcement, and societal issues from the perspective of a police officer and a mental health professional. Have questions about current events, social media, mental health, or police matters? Visit thecopandtheshrink.com. Let's get this episode started with your hosts, Harold Bozeman and Dennis Carradine.
Hey, welcome to The Cop and the Shrink. We are at episode number 7 today. Seven. And actually, when we're recording, it is Halloween. So happy Halloween, everybody. I hope everybody is playing it safe and getting all the goodies. So what's your favorite Halloween candy as we talk about this?
My favorite candy overall is Reese's Cups.
So
anything with peanut butter is my favorite candy, to be honest.
So before we start the episode, let's discuss this. People believe that the Reese's peanut butter Halloween pumpkins and the Reese's peanut butter Christmas trees taste differently than the Reese's peanut butter cups.
It's true.
They're the same thing.
But the taste is different. It's absolutely true. They taste different.
I don't know. We'll have to have a blind taste test on the Cop and the Shrink. We're going to get people in with a blind taste test for this. I defer with my colleague and friend here. So anyway, hey, visit us on thecopandtheshrink.com. Check us out on Instagram. Hey, do me a favor and go to that like button, like us, follow us, do what you need to on all social media. We got a couple of great topics. We always have great topics. It's what we want to develop and discuss.
If we do say so ourselves.
But if you are watching us on YouTube right now, or you're seeing any pictures of this, you actually are seeing our new merch. You are seeing us in our sweatshirts tonight, The Cop and the Shrink. And obviously we have on our website, our little merch section, we actually have some new shirts. If you haven't seen a couple of little postings, we actually have a retro from the 80s, the Cop and the Shrink shirt.com out there. And then we actually have a silhouette shirt that's out there. And again, any of the money that goes there to helps us with our what do we call it? Our content creation. Is that what it's called? It's content creation. Yeah. So any of that is content creation. We also have the money go to the Trauma Survivors Foundation. So, and here we are. Here we go. So this actually, our first topic, I thought was kind of interesting because, as you know, our producer here is my son, Dennis. And I was talking to my son, and he said, "Hey, Dad, can you do a topic about quotas?" And I thought, actually a really, really interesting topic, because when you look at quotas in our society and what that actually means, and obviously I'm going to allow you to explain the notion of quota, but we hear that a ton. We hear people saying that police shouldn't have quotas. Police should not be pulling out as many of their tickets as they do, or do things that they need to do with that. And obviously it's something that's been there. You hear it. It's not going away.
Well, I think it is going away. I think in this day and age,
what people are talking about with it isn't going away.
Right. So quotas, just for a little history, quotas has been the principle that police departments or supervisors or executives in police departments will require a certain number of things from each officer in each period, usually in each month. A certain number of arrests, a certain number of parking tickets, a certain number of traffic tickets, whatever the focus happens to be for that particular agency. And it's a requirement that you make that many arrests. And it doesn't speak to the quality or the validity of the arrest. It doesn't speak to things like officer discretion in writing tickets and things like that. The number is set, the number is required, and that's what quotas have been. Some agencies, when quotas started becoming a bad word, some agencies moved and called it incentives. So if you met your performance goals, your performance review would be better. So instead of saying this is required, they would say you'll get a better review if you meet these benchmarks.
So with that, let me just throw this out. So if somebody at a bank, we'll say, whatever bank you choose, I don't care which one it is, whatever you go to, if somebody opens up 12 accounts in a month, they get an incentive for that.
Okay.
So they might get $500 for opening up 12 new accounts. Same concept?
Different concept.
Different concept.
The banker, the car salesman, whatever, that's all salesmanship, right? They get incentives for selling a product that they were hired to sell. They get incentives for making money for the corporation, for meeting, like I said, meeting the benchmarks for their sales goals. With police, it's different, right? Setting a benchmark or setting a required number for things like arrests, that at the end, that's setting a number of lives you have to affect that month. Would you agree?
I would agree, and obviously it's a major effect. But if the principle is similar in any way, shape, or form, isn't it the goal of every officer that's out there? And I know a couple, right? Isn't it the goal of every officer out there to get the bad guy?
Right, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. So having a goal to go out and catch people who are committing crimes and to stop crime and deter crime, that's one goal. But when you start throwing in required numbers, then it's not catch the bad guy. It's how many people can I make a bad guy, essentially. I can't say never because it does happen. People yell at you, but it's rarely happened that I've walked up to a car that I've pulled over and had somebody say, "Please write me a ticket." So the difference between selling loans, selling insurance, selling cars, they've walked into your office and said, "Will you sell me this?" Right. Nobody's walking into the police station saying, "I'd like to be arrested for a felony, please." So there's the difference in the concept, and I think
that would actually be amazing.
So requiring police to take up a certain number of enforcement actions every month, it almost deteriorates the quality of police work, wouldn't you think? Because in the time it's taking, you're just meeting these numbers now. You're going to make this arrest and that arrest for low level offenses, or you're dismissing your ability to have some discretion, and you're just making arrests to meet numbers, where there's probably somebody worse doing something worse out there that you might be detecting,
right?
If you're not making these low level arrests just to hit these benchmarks.
And I guess the psychology behind it is that, ultimately people heard about this and it might have been a thing in the past or whatever, but it's almost their way of kind of the smoke and mirrors, right? So if I say to the officer that pulls me over, and we could look at this at any small town USA. Any small town USA is, we'll say their main street going through it is 35 miles an hour. And if somebody is doing 40 or 45 miles an hour, they are breaking the law. They're going above the speed limit. Right. But the smoke and mirrors comes into the fact was, well, I wasn't really speeding because the officer, should know that they shouldn't give us a ticket unless we're going 15 over versus 5 or 10 over. And I think people can justify the fact by saying, well, this must be a quota, versus saying, I broke the law. I was going too fast and I broke the law.
Right, and that's a slippery slope anyway, to have somebody make that argument, say, well, I shouldn't be given a ticket if I'm going 14 miles per hour over. You should make an exception for me doing 49, but then the person that's doing 51 does get a ticket.
Right.
So how far do we stretch it? Is it 15? Is it 17? Maybe we'll go to 19 over.
But it's still breaking the law.
The law should be absolute, right?
Yeah.
And strictly speaking, 36 in a 35 is speeding. It's breaking law. We give you some latitude there for maybe differences in odometer calibration. Maybe you didn't look down at that moment and sped up a little bit unintentionally, inadvertently. But you do get, as a standard practice in most places, you do get 9 anyway.
Right.
So they give you up to, this small town in Delaware where the speed limit going through their main thoroughfare is 35. They're not pulling people over for 36. They're pulling a bunch of people over in town, and it's for 41, it's for 49, it's for 50. They also have a part-time school zone in town that's 20 during certain parts of the day. They will pull you over for doing 26. That's a safety issue for the kids.
But it's the justification of it, right? So we go back and we say that ultimately we have these quotas. So you're pulling me over because of one of two reasons, right? And we have to go into this section to it. You're pulling me over either A, because it's the end of the month and you have a quota, or B, you profiled me. that you knew that I was a certain person of a certain age or a certain race or color, creed, whatever, and you pulled me over because you have a quota, you have to write Mr. Officer, you have to write, or Miss Officer, whatever, you have to write 135 tickets every day. That fits your quota. And you will write them from the 25th of the month to the 30th of the month because that's what you're being told. And you pulled me over because I'm a white guy that is driving a nice vehicle and you know that I will pay my ticket. Sound good, right?
Sounds great. Totally
What?
false.
Totally false,
Totally false.
but we could justify it.
Let's take this part of the year, for example, because anybody that would say that, I would invite them to do a ride-along with an agency that allows it. And here's why. Taking this part of the year, let's go October to March. October to March, it's dark more than it's light, correct? So I would challenge anybody to get behind a car at night in a police car, drive up behind another car that's moving in the same direction, and tell me the age, race, and sex of the driver of that car. From behind, through tinted windows, in the dark, without the benefit of any other view. And tell me then if you think that everyone who gets pulled over at night is being profiled for anything.
So what you're saying is quotas and profiling is not a thing?
I'm saying that both have existed in the world of policing.
Sure.
And any responsible progressive police agency and even any progressive responsible police officer shouldn't be engaging in either.
Right. And you know, let's be honest about it. And, you know, and any kidding aside with it, is that if you are being profiled or if there is a quota out there, I mean, the majority of officers are not going to be using that. But also we have to kind of understand of the profiling in our own nature and all that. And we were talking about this, you know, we do our little prep for the show. And I gave the scenario that if Harold and I are walking in a college town, we'll say, you know, because we're literally 10 minutes, 15 minutes away from the University of Delaware. So if we were walking on campus at University of Delaware, business suits, what have you, most of the student population would not look any which way at us, right? They probably wouldn't even see us because we're middle-aged guys, so we don't exist in their eyes anyway. So we would walk, nothing, not even flinching, not jumping out of the way, not scared whatsoever. But if we change that a little bit, we change it to where I'm wearing, I don't know, if it's me, I'm wearing maybe I like beat up clothing or
let's say we're wearing you know, high tech boots and BDU pants.
Yeah, there you go.
Then suddenly the same guys that were in suits yesterday are active shooters today.
Very true. So we're looking at that profile, and we put it out there that people profile in a certain way of what they're afraid of. So maybe they're not afraid of middle-aged white guys that are walking in suits, but if we look at some of the serial killers in the world, and Ted Bundy being one that I had emphasized, good-looking, lawyerly-looking guy that, you know, was getting on and off college campuses. He was convicted of 167 murders.
Suspected of. I think they
it was
somewhere in the 30s. I think was convicted of.
But it was some unreal number. But it was because people trusted him because of his look, because they did not think that, okay, well, this is just a stranger who cares about what he looks like. He is still somebody that probably shouldn't be on campus,
right,
and shouldn't be around the student body. You know, we're talking 21-year-olds, and this guy's in his 30s. Maybe he shouldn't have been on campus.
But let's taking the University of Delaware as an example. If a guy in his mid-30s in a tweed sport jacket is walking around campus, the first thought is, oh, he's probably a teacher.
Right.
He's probably
true.
a professor, and so he's okay to be here.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, like I said, the next day, if he's wearing some tactical gear or some beat up, you know, jeans slouched down off of his waist and a concert T-shirt, now he's a different guy.
Right.
So it really is all superficial.
Right.
And so when we talk about profiling, that's one of the things that police departments have actually worked hard to combat. They've worked hard to get past that. In a lot of instances, what's seen as profiling is just a product of environment, right? If you look at a place, if it's an inner city police department that's got a majority minority population,
right,
then the majority of arrestees organically will be from the minority populations, not because the police officers are looking for them, But
Right.
because the people that are in that area living and committing crime come from the population of that area.
Right. Right.
Now, I can tell you that there have been efforts to combat profiling since the 90s, since my career started. There have been different efforts, different different encouragements.
Watch what you say.
Different encouragements about learning not to profile, about cultural sensitivity, about changing the way we do business as a police department. Right. They keep responsible records now. I know that certain police departments in this area, whenever there's a car stop or a pedestrian stop that's conducted, part of what the officer calls out on the radio is a description of the person being stopped. And that's not to do anything but track who's being stopped, where, and why.
Right.
And that's to combat profiling as well, because if you have a complaint made against an officer, and it's time and time again the same demographic, the same description person, and nobody else,
Right.
that might be an early warning system for that specific officer. Hey, maybe let's talk to him about how he identifies offenders.
Right. Right.
And that's not to say that you might not just come across the same kind of person driving erratically or driving illegally, every day of your shift. And that could happen as well. But at least there's an effort to track who's being stopped and what the given reason is. So,
Well, that's the other one. If you're driving recklessly, if you're running red lights, and we talked about that, as apparently we're not supposed to stop people that are running red lights now. But again, it's almost that indignation that you're pulling me over, so I want to get out of it the cheapest way possible. I want to get out of this ticket, or I want to get out of committing this offense the cheapest way possible. So I am going to say that you're doing a quota, you're doing me wrong, you profiled me, you're doing me wrong. And again, I could be wrong with this. Obviously, people that live in certain areas and that have had certain run-ins and certain things with police that were negative things, obviously there's something else to it other than that. But what I see with the majority of it, it becomes this, almost like I'm just going to go with the cheapest thing possible to get out of it. There's many times, and if you're at dinner parties that are outside of dinner parties with, I would think with dinner parties without police, people almost brag about getting out of tickets. They brag about the ways that they've gotten out of speeding tickets. They brag about the ways that they've gotten out of these minor offenses and so forth. Oh, hey, Bob, I was able, I told the cop that, I was an important person and I had to get to this, and he just gave me a warning and all that. But yet these are the same people that are going to castigate somebody else for breaking a law. Same ones that are exceedingly excited about,
how they got away with it.
How they got away with it are the same ones that are going to say, well, that cop should be pulling more people over. Did you see that crazy fool that, just ran three red lights or whatever it is? But yet they don't put it on themselves. They don't say, well, maybe the officer pulled me over because I was going 8 to 10 miles over the speed limit. Or maybe the officer pulled me over because I swerved into a different lane because I was texting and driving. Okay, all these things are things that you should be pulled over for, right? I mean,
yeah.
It would, in my world, you're supposed to, right? Look, I'm admitting this on air right now. I have texted while I was driving.
Oh, goodness.
I did. I might have swerved a little bit. But if I see somebody that's openly texting and driving, I get pissed. But again, I should be culpable for my own bad driving at that point.
And I see what you're saying about people using it as a crutch, right? I'm gonna get out of this by accusing the officer, by accusing the department of wrongdoing. I'm gonna use that as my out. I can tell you, and I not speaking for any specific department or departments, but I can tell you specifically that in every case I'm aware of, there are active efforts on the parts of the police departments to ensure that profiling doesn't happen.
Right.
And to identify it when it does. And to proffer some discipline if it's needed when it happens.
Okay.
And that there's not a police department that I'm aware of locally. I don't know what goes on in the rest of the country, but locally, there's not a police department I'm aware of that practices the use of quotas.
Right.
So they're relics of the past. Profiling and quotas are relics of the past. And I think that by and large, law enforcement in this country has done a great job doing away with those relics and professionalizing law enforcement. Does it still exist in some places? Maybe.
Sure.
Maybe there are some not so progressive police officials in far-flung corners of the country that still practice these things. But
Right.
I think that there's such a public eye on law enforcement and such scrutiny by the public, by the law, by politicians. That I think it would be foolish for any agency to actively encourage things like quotas and profiling, or to tolerate things like profiling and quotas from their personnel. So I think it's a lot less common than activists would have you believe.
Right. Well, so, okay, let me play devil's advocate for a moment, please, right? So what? So what? So that you have a quota. Somewhere along the line, okay, I'm going to say Midwestern. That's bad. I'm going to throw something. But some police agency in the Midwest, far, far away from the East Coast, has a quota and says, all right, boys and girls, excuse me, we want you to give 50 tickets this month. Don't care who. Don't care what they look like. Don't care who they are. We want you to give out at least 50 speeding tickets because we know there's at least 50 people out there this month each one of you will find speeding. So what?
So like I said, that could go to eroding the quality of the police work, right? We talked about the small town Delaware. Small town Delaware, if they start giving out a bunch of tickets for 1 or 2 miles per hour over, and these people decide to challenge it in court because of odometer differences, because of the margin of error in the radar, whatever the case may be, they start challenging it. Now a bunch of their cases are getting thrown out. A bunch of their tickets are being dismissed. So it goes to the quality of the where if you're just doing solid work and the officer has set up in his or her mind, I'm going to stop people 9 miles per hour over or more. So that defeats the margin of error in the car, that defeats the margin of error in the radar. And I know that they're speeding. I could say unequivocally they were speeding and they should pay a fine for that. I think, like I said earlier, just based on the numbers, it erodes the quality of the work. You start getting questionable cases sent to the AGs for prosecution. They decline to prosecute the cases. Now what have you done? Now you've told the person who got arrested for something that was probably legitimately wrong, they've got to pass. Now they think they've gotten away with something, so and their conduct continues.
Yeah. Well, no, that's the so what. It always comes down to my two questions in the world of shrinkology is always, so what and who cares? At the end of the day, who cares should be the general public, saying that people are not getting away from crimes, no matter how large, how small. But the so what comes down to the fact that it doesn't continue to perpetrate an issue. And that's what we have.
That's what we get.
It's a good topic. I like this. We can get fired up with this. But it is what it is. Hey, so keep listening to us. We're coming up with topic number 2, which is another good one. The next one may give us more likes, or people may just start protesting us. Hopefully nicely, silently protesting us, but whatever.
Or we'll just give you a fake address to the office.
We're still talking about it, damn it. So please visit us at thecopandtheshrink.com. Make sure you like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, wherever your social media goes, and make sure you buy some of this merch. Look at that. Bam! The Cop and the Shrink official sweatshirt of the show. This is awesome. All right, stand by. We'll talk to you soon.
The Division of Wellness Services of the National Fraternal Order of Police is committed to leading the efforts to ensure the well-being of law enforcement officers. The FOP intends to no longer react to issues of critical stress affecting its members, but instead take a pre-act approach that is driven by trained peer support, research, empowerment of officers, awareness and stigma reduction, connections to service, and ongoing training and development. Information about the Wellness Division, resources, and publications can be found at fop.net/officer wellness. Donations to the National FOP in support of their Division of Wellness Services and other programs can be made online at nfop.firstresponderprocessing.com.
And we're back on the Cop and the Shrink. Make sure, again, visit us on thecopandtheshrink.com. Obviously, we always have our merch up a little bit. We'll talk about that for a second. Make sure you follow us on the Cop and the Shrink. But go over also to the traumasurvivorsfoundation.org and pick up a couple of our little brands here. We have our Captain's Punch, aptly named for our good friend, Captain Alan Davis, retired from Chester Police Department. It's done by Wagon House Winery and Three Boys brand. You could check us out there. Check out their wine. You could also check out Big Oyster Brewery, Survivors IPA. We have a little news that we'll talk in a different episode about our Survivors IPA beer. It's an amazing beer. And then also check out drinksurvivors.com and get some fresh roasted coffees. The lifeblood, mother love of the world of any first responder is caffeine. And man, we want to give you your fix. We actually have, and I ordered some. I ordered some of it called Cinnabon. It tastes like cinnamon buns.
Oh, no kidding.
It is actually an excellent
and
coffee.
You didn't spend half an hour a little while ago criticizing my French vanilla creamer, though.
I did, and I will continue.
Cinnabon coffee.
So here's a difference between my friend and I, is that I am a black coffee drinker, black like my soul, right? You know, I am a black coffee drinker, and he likes French vanilla creamer. We'll put that up as a comment somewhere. We'll post that on Facebook and see what people like. I like tasting the different flavors of coffee. I like the aromas of coffee.
Okay, but I've never eaten a cinnamon flavored coffee bean, so I don't know.
They
how your
make them. It actually
coffee comes into this.
It's actually Honduran. Anyway, they have it down there. They grow it on trees, I heard. Anyway, also please check out greatcigarreviews.com. Buddy Jim Wyatt over there. For those watching again, if you see the t-shirts, we got t-shirts and stickers on Great Cigar. Look at all the merch we have. We're ultimately just going to have a table of merch, but check that one out. So all the proceeds go to, it's called Cigar and Beer Brand. So all of it goes to Survivors IPA, it goes to the Cop and the Shrink, goes to the trauma survivors. So Jim's doing us a solid, and we thank him for that. We did consider him the first sponsor of the Cop and the Shrink.
Indeed.
I'm excited. All right.
Topic 2.
Topic number 2.
Good morning, America. What offends you today?
What? So, are we as a society just completely offended by everything right now?
I think that's the goal. I think we're in the offended Olympics right now. I think everyone wants to be offended by something that no one's been offended by before. You want to be the first and the most offended by this thing.
So before, and there was something that we came out there, and we have to emphasize a couple of things. Number one, we're both in cultures, as in the first responder culture, breaking stones is a part of life. You know, it really is a part of life. I look at my background, and this is just kind of funny, you know, any of those stereotypes of Italians, right? Is how does an Italian get their nickname, right? So it would be like, you know, Tony Two Chins, you know, because he was fat, you know, and he had two chins. So we call him Tony Two Chins.
I mean, anybody that's seen a Bronx Tale,
yeah,
you know, coffee cake and the whale.
His face looked like coffee. But, you know, you look at it, is that we're in that culture where, you know, you're poking fun at people because that's a form of love. It's almost like, look, if we don't break your stones, we don't trust you or we don't love you, right? I mean, that's kind of how it is.
Thinking of terrible things to say to one another has a long and glorious tradition.
Now we will also say, and we have to reemphasize this, is that if the outsiders in the world hear the first responders, and this also goes with medical, because if you go to an emergency room, look, and this isn't calling anybody out, but if you go to an emergency room and you just hang back a little bit and you listen to how the docs and the nurses talk to each other, oh my God, you want to talk about dark humor with each other. No, and that's to get through this. The psychological nature of it is that it gets through the worst of what they see. You know, they see horrible things come into that emergency room. Police see it, firefighters see it, EMTs see it. And how do you deal with it? Well, you try to make fun of it.
And maybe to an extent, it's our way, it's our form of stress inoculation, right? If we say the most horrible things to one another at roll call and in the building and in training and, you know, just passing along, if we say the most horrible things to one another all day long, There's nothing that anybody on the street can say to me that's going to hurt my feelings. Worse than that has been said to me already this morning 4 times.
And that was while I was getting a cup of coffee with French vanilla creamer. Anyway.
Sorry about that, Cinnabon.
So we're also in 2 different professions that I think that ultimately garnishes a certain level of offense, right? So being an officer, people ultimately will offend you by some of the questions that they ask you, correct?
See that, and that was part of what we talked about in our prep. It doesn't necessarily offend me. I get,
or they're aiming to almost offend.
They're trying to be as offensive as they can. They want to push our buttons. They want to see if they can get a rise out of us. But like I told you when we were doing the prep, being offended is. They say that there are 2 people in a communication, right? The sender and the receiver.
Right.
Being offended is all about the receiver. It's all internal to the receiver. In order to be offended by someone's ideas or words or actions, in order to be offended by that, you have to care about that person's opinion or about that person's existence. And if you don't, if it's someone you don't know who has said something or someone you don't interact with has said something, being offended is a you problem. Right. Not a them problem. Now, I'm not talking about in your home life, in your love and your intimate relationships. If someone who is pledged, is vowed to love and support you and is your partner in life says something that really bothers you, well, that's something the 2 of you need to work out. And it's probably valid to be offended when it's appropriate in that case. But some stranger says something to you that you've never met or that you'll never meet again, or in our case, somebody that's being arrested says something terrible to you as a response to them messing up and now sowing the consequences, reaping the consequences. Those things shouldn't offend you at all. And if some comedian in some far-flung studio in Southern California says something that's offensive to you, maybe you need to reevaluate how you receive offense.
Well, and you have to think about, and as we transition to that comedian somewhere in the world, and we'll talk about the special that came up. I said to you, and I'll say this to everyone, is I love owning real estate in somebody's brain, and let me define that. Owning real estate in somebody's brain, meaning that somewhere along the line that they were angry or pissed off at me, or they found something I did just utterly, horrible, which I don't do much of, right? That they ultimately remember me for that. And I've long since forgotten them. I forgot what I said. I forgot what I did. But they continue to remember that. I own real estate in their brain. I ultimately, and look, not sounding arrogant or anything like that. I meet tons of people. We meet tons of people on our crisis scenes. We meet tons of people in our events and all that. And if for some reason, somewhere along the line, I upset you and you are holding that grudge against me, I own real estate. I literally own real estate where you could have a peaceful existence with that in my mind and ultimately somewhere being offensive. And it was funny because I had a guy that, and this was years ago at one of the taco fests, right? Years ago, this guy was falling down drunk, just literally inebriated out of his mind, right? And I had said to him, I said, buddy, you shouldn't be drinking anymore. Let's help you out, get you some water, do whatever. For some reason, he took great offense to that. That I was trying to help this guy, like legitimately trying to help this guy. And, okay, let's be a little self-serving and say that we, ultimately didn't want somebody falling and cracking their head in the middle of a festival, because that's how festivals die pretty quickly, right? And that's how somebody dies very quickly. Snapshot 5-6 years later, the guy sees me at another taco festival, and he goes, "You're the prick," literally pointing at me. "You're the prick that made me stop drinking 5 or 6 years ago."
Oh, you're welcome.
And I said, "So you're sober now?" I said, "You got a beer in your hand." He looks at me, What are you, a comedian?" And I said, "No, I'm just pointing out the fact that you just said that I made you stop again." And he said, "At that moment." And I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "Was this, this taco fest?" And he says, "Yeah." And I said, "Bro, you were like literally falling down. If you had another drink, my fear was that we were taking you out in an ambulance." And I said, "That was all it was." I said, "You've been holding on to that for 5 or 6 years?" And he says, well, yeah.
You've been cruising taco festivals for 5 years, trying to figure out which one I'd be at so we could have this talk.
So you could literally, and that's me holding real estate. It's crazy. He's offended because I'm trying to help him. Okay. Ah. Okay. So let's talk about the comedian, Dave Chappelle.
Let's talk about that. I hold that anyone who thinks that Chappelle is transphobic or homophobic or hates people who are trans has only been believing what they've been told to believe. I think that anybody who watches that special all the way through and hears what he has to say will see him make fun of 5 or 6 different groups, sometimes twice each. And at the end, he tells a very touching story about a trans woman that he was friends with in Southern California who took her life.
Right.
And so he has a special place in his heart for this friend of his. If he hated trans people or if he was afraid, transphobic, he wouldn't have had a friend and have such warm memories and warm stories to tell about her.
Right. Okay. And I'll emphasize, I am not a Chappelle fan, and there's a reason. Not because of his comedy. And I honestly thought you knew this story until I told you in prep time. So I had responded to the Hurricane Katrina relief efforts. Was down in that area for about 4 months, and one of the areas that we ended up in was it was either Bay St. Louis or Pascagoula, forgetting which one. We ended up in the area, and there was a 15,000 person line that they were waiting there for Red Cross cash, or they were waiting for the Red Cross credit cards, which ultimately that always made me a little weird because the power was out for forever and they were handing people credit cards. That made no sense to me, but whatever. So very limited resources. We were out in 115-degree heat. It was 1,000% humidity. I'm painting the picture here, right? There were people, we were pulling kids off the line to do CPR on babies because they were dehydrated. This was a horrible, horrible scene. The Army then that was down there, or the National Guard, National Guard was down there, was told very specifically they only had enough cash, enough resources, and enough of these credit cards for 3,000 people. And they were told to break the line and dismiss everybody. This is a grave situation. This is not a fun situation out of the world. So as we're looking in line, we're trying to get people's names and so forth. These 2 huge tour buses pull up. And one of the tour buses had Dave Chappelle in it. He got out of the tour bus, freshly dressed, freshly cleaned, waved to the crowd, directed one of his handlers to grab a case of water for these, buses that are $1 million buses, got back in the bus, and he left.
Well, if you're going to be upset with somebody about something, be upset with them about actions like that and not about words that they speak.
No, and that was an action, pure action. So here comes a special, and everybody talks about how good Dave Chappelle is as a comedian. And, of course, I'm just like, screw that guy type of thing. But what he said, and you and I talked about this, is he came out and he said, it is more acceptable to make fun of African Americans than it is the LGBTQ community. And I thought, damn, that is one hell of a statement. And then who got offended by it? LGBTQ community. And that I thought, wait a minute, he is saying this, that we as a society are making fun of African Americans and we're getting away with it for making fun of people and nobody cares.
Or nobody cares as much.
Nobody cares as much.
So, circling back to what I was saying about it, it's all in the recipient, right? So right. By permitting yourself to be offended, you've given them too much power over you, right? You've given them the power to shape your thoughts, to shape your feelings. You've given somebody who you're angry at the authority and the power and the permission to shape your thoughts and feelings and your perceptions. Whereas if you just don't give a damn about what anybody says about you or to you, and you understand that they don't have any power over you if you don't let them, then you come out on top of this, right? But what the community has done now by moving against Dave Chappelle with the protests, with the Twitter and with everything else, just trying to blast him, trying to drag him on Twitter and what have you, they've actually they've actually helped Dave.
Right.
I logged into Netflix last night and looked at the trending now. And what's trending now is the Dave Chappelle show,
Sure.
the throwback Dave Chappelle show, and all of his network specials are all trending on Netflix. So everybody wants to know now, anybody who didn't have a care in the world about Dave's comedy or about what was going on, that hadn't seen it, that weren't familiar with it, now they're going, well, let me take a look. Let me see what's happening. So because of all this outrage, because of all these protests, people are watching his stuff, maybe buying his stuff, putting money in his pocket for the act of having offended them. Whereas if they had just said, it's comedy, it's a joke, I'm not going to let him have power over me, let it go, and stayed off to the side, he wouldn't be having all this free publicity.
Right.
He wouldn't have all this viewership. His numbers, his ratings wouldn't be skyrocketing. Sometimes it's hard to bite your tongue when you think that something's an injustice. Sometimes it's hard to bite your tongue when somebody says something rotten about you. But sometimes it's best to bite your tongue in those situations because, like I said earlier, all press is good press, right?
Yeah.
And now Dave has an abundance of it.
Right. More so than what he probably had going into it. Because didn't he took an extended break from comedy?
Yeah,
Like,
years.
I don't know, found Jesus, whatever he did. He left and then came back and now trending #1 in the nation. That's amazing to me, and it's amazing people are giving that much power to a comedian.
And he has said exactly what you would expect a person to say. He is saying what I'm telling the rest of you to say. I don't care what they say about me. I don't care what they think about me. I'm not giving them that power over me. He has said these things like you will not summon me. You will not give me directions.
Right.
If you want to have a conversation, I'll sit down and have a conversation with you, but it'll be on terms we agree to.
Well, you think about that. It's censorship at its best form. I was telling my daughter we were talking about the late 80s, early 90s. You remember when books were being banned back then, and they banned Of Mice and Men
and Catcher in the Rye.
And Huckleberry Finn. Like, people, you cannot read these books. They are masterful pieces of art, is what they are. I've always loved those books, and then but I read those books with a mindful set that this was a period piece. Like the of Mice and Men was done in the Great Depression about two kind of grifters, right? Mm-hmm. And then they used the term, and when I say it, not to offend anybody, but they used the term retard in that book, the R word, retard, to describe another person in that book. And at that time, that word was socially acceptable, at that time.
Right.
So then you snapshot it into the 80s and the 90s, and then you say, well, that's offensive, so let's ban that book. And now you snapshot into 2021, and you say, well, everything's offensive, so let's ban everything. Let's ban blue comedy, right? Let's ban everything that ultimately people want to say or how to say it, just to kind of break those stones again or point out simple, stupid stuff, and then ultimately create almost this homogenous idea of society.
Right. It's Orwellian, right? Like, newspeak is designed to control and to drive the direction of thought.
Right.
Right. If you control the things that we can say, then you control the things that we hear and can learn, and that ultimately drives the path of thought moving forward. It's controlling.
Right.
It's not more freedom to be who you are. It's less freedom to express yourself.
Right. And again, I think expressing yourself in a certain way, you don't have to be hurtful. And we clearly are not advocating for people walking out there saying pejoratives to everybody just to say it.
No, but for everybody now who's offended by something in the last 5 years, we've built all these different categories of things we're going to be offended by. For everybody who is in the newly offended, I'll call them, in the last decade, welcome to the party. Because people have been saying ugly things to the members of my profession for many, many decades. Oh. And if we were going to have a protest or a crying to the pillow party every time somebody said something ugly to us, we would have no time for anything else.
I think the majority starts with me and my profession. No offense, but I don't believe in talking to somebody else about my problems. No offense, but I'm not going to have you put me in the nut hut.
And the answer to that is, no offense will be taken because I don't care about your opinion of me. That's the answer.
As long as I hold real estate in your head, that's all it is.
The answer is always, I'm not going to give you the power of having offended me. That's the answer.
Right. Well, so quick aside. So last summer, when everybody, when we had the rioting and so forth, horrible, injustices, and everyone started going towards statues. Now this, and I say it's funny because, well, I find the humor in it. So there was a statue in Wilmington, Delaware, Caesar Rodney. Okay, the Caesar Rodney statue. And I had somebody that was there saying how angry and pissed off they were at that statue because it was a bygone era and he owned slaves. And I said, the person on the horse that the statue was, and the statue itself was Caesar Rodney riding a horse. And if you know the legacy of Caesar Rodney was an elderly statesman. He actually had, they said he had a huge cancerous growth on his, this was not a good looking man, apparently. This was kind of a bad situation. He didn't own slaves at the time and was one of the charters of Delaware. So that's the story of the Caesar Rodney and the Caesar Rodney statue. And I looked at the guy and I was like, well, he didn't own slaves. And the guy looked at me and said, well, Paul Revere did. And I went, wait a minute. That's Caesar Rodney. That's Caesar Rodney's statue. No, it's not. It's Paul Revere, and Paul Revere owned slaves.
But underneath the statue is
a
a 4x4 plaque that says Caesar Rodney, and this is his story.
And I thought, you're offended by something that's not even what it actually is. And Paul Revere never owned slaves. He was from Massachusetts, which was a free state.
To make matters worse,
there we go.
In central Philadelphia, they vandalized They vandalized a well-known statue of a well-known abolitionist.
Oh yeah.
Who started on his own dollar the first schools for African Americans and freed slaves in Pennsylvania at his own expense.
Yep.
Started free schools for the black residents of Philadelphia, and he was a well-known abolitionist. But because it was a statue of a guy in 19th century garb, he was evil and it was vandalized.
So when we are offended, let's put this out there. Be offended for a real reason.
By something real.
Yeah, be offended because somebody came at you personally and you have personal meaning to that.
Right. Be offended by somebody who you care about, whose opinion you care about, if you must be offended at all. But for heaven's sake, don't let a stranger offend you with their meaningless words.
And especially a statue. Don't let a statue offend you.
Don't let a comedian offend you. This has been going on for decades. Look, Lenny Bruce.
Oh, my God.
Bobcat Goldthwait. Sam Kinison. Andrew Dice Clay.
Bob Saget.
Oh,
my God. Completely blue. Oh, that guy. Woo. Some of his stuff is nasty.
And now Dave. And I don't know who's next. Somebody's next.
So
Richard Pryor. We've forgotten about Richard
Pryor.
Oh, my
God.
He was offensive as hell.
Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy, right? These are all...
So wait a minute. He offended Bill Cosby.
Bill Cosby's offensive in his own right. All these people have been for decades saying offensive things or off-color things. And It's only recently, in the past 5 years now, we've got this cancel culture. None of those guys would have survived their careers if cancel culture had been around in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
And as we wrap up the section, we talk about that. Blazing Saddles made fun of everyone. Literally made fun of every race, every culture, every religion, everything. Made fun of it. That movie could not be made in our society today. There would be protests, rioting. People would build a statue and then break it down of Mel Brooks. It's ridiculous. And here's Mel Brooks, this Jewish comedian turned director and writer that ultimately in any of his movies makes fun of himself the most. Is that self-deprecating? But yet we wouldn't even be able to have a movie like that. And obviously, if you watch it,
Spaceballs. We're talking about Mel Brooks. Even Spaceballs made fun of everyone.
Yeah. It at some level, I get it. But if it is a personal offense, people are attacking you personally, and you take offense to it, then by all means take offense to whatever it is. But please don't bang a gong for me if somebody in your circle of friends are making fun of shrinks.
Well, we talked a little bit earlier about people collectors.
People collectors.
We won't get into that, but I want to talk about... I think some people are offense collectors, right?
Offense collectors.
People will literally comb through social media, pop culture, entertainment, what have you. They'll comb through things to see what they can label as offensive, like as a matter of their daily routine.
Right.
Like they spend so much time worrying about what might be out there that I haven't found yet that offends me.
Right.
They're not living their lives. Like, stop worrying about what might offend you. If you haven't heard it, it didn't offend you.
Right.
Stop looking for it, and you won't find it.
And that goes into a whole other topic, is that
Like, don't watch Dave.
don't watch Dave. If you type in anything in Google, you type in that all chimpanzees are blue, guaranteed there's an article in there that's going to say a chimpanzee is blue. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. Denny, do that. Go ahead and type it in now. No, just kidding. But don't look for those offenses. I agree with you. Oh, my God. We went off on this.
We went a little long on that one.
Oh, my God.
All right, stand by. Segment 3, we're going to talk about some current events and some newsworthy topics.
I hope so.
We'll be right back shortly with the Cop and the Shrink.
See you soon. You have seen their faces and read their stories. Our hospital heroes and first responders are remarkable. Their strength is inspiring as they continue to work around the clock in the fight against COVID-19. Throughout the pandemic, they have had limited downtime and limited access to prepared meals. Our hospital heroes are working in extremely stressful environments, literally placing their own safety at risk to help the sick and dying. Our mission is to show these frontline workers that we, the community they are caring for, supports and cares for them through the simple act of providing them with a prepared meal to help sustain them through the day. To complete this mission, we are partnering with local restaurants to deliver quality food directly to hospitals, urgent cares, testing centers, treatment centers, nursing facilities, and first responder stations. We have delivered nearly 25,000 meals to over 60 locations in Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Maryland. We have been honored to help these amazing men and women. The meals we bring are met with such gratitude. In those moments, as the meals are set up, we see their gratitude in the form of tears and laughter. A simple meal can provide hope in the face of this terrifying disease. The Trauma Survivors Foundation's Hospital Heroes Food Drive has the incredible privilege of coming into the worlds of our hospital heroes and first responders at the most difficult time in their lives. For a $6 meal donation, you can help a hospital hero and a struggling restaurant stay focused and positive through the COVID-19 pandemic. There is a light at the end of the tunnel, but we still need your help to see our hospital heroes through this fight. Our heroes are why we do what we do, but you are the how. Your donation helps us provide food and hope to our frontline heroes. Your donation makes hope stronger than fear. Text Hospital Heroes to 44321 to donate a meal to a hero. Please visit us at hospitalheroesfooddrive.org to learn more about our mission. Welcome back to the Cop and the Shrink. You got to think, we have little breaks for the commercials or whatever it is. And we do, as friends, we crack each other up with a lot of jokes. We actually were just doing karaoke prior to this section. So maybe on the outtake reels, because I know Denny is recording everything we do. We're going to have the outtake sections at some while. And we may offend people with our karaoke skills.
Only if they let us.
Only if they let us. Only let us. So topics here. So we're going to hold one because I think we're going to introduce a new section after the first topic, which I think is going to be funny because there's a couple of things that we're going to talk about that, hey, we can talk about because this is our show, damn it. It's the Cop and the Shrink. Make sure you go to copandtheshrink.com. Check us out on all our social media. And please like us. Please share us. Do all that fun stuff. And remember, buy the merch. So.
Welcome back.
Welcome back. Gabby Petito. Let's as a current topic, and we're going to talk about this in the periphery of the topic at hand here. But we've all heard about this story. We've all heard about this younger woman with a gentleman laundry. They were cruising out in a van in the Midwest. She was found dead, and then he went back to Florida with this rented van.
Some would say fled back to Florida.
Fled back to Florida, went to the family, and then he absconded. He left before police could catch up with him. And then within the past week, his body was found. Well, actually, they said his remains were found.
Which is probably somewhat smaller than a whole body.
Which we had said that this is because it was Florida, it was near a certain section, that there was potential of alligator or something getting at it. Because the press normally says body has been found. We just heard remains. So, our little brains got all over the place. But the bigger picture here was, and this is where we started talking about this, about domestic violence. So in the periphery of this, we talked about the police had pulled them over, or somewhere along the line there was a report made that they were having a fight. Police showed up to the van, had talked to both of them, and he ended up convincing the police, or at least this is what the press is saying, that they were fine, and the police let them go and let him go and let her go back with him. So that's kind of where we are. And that came up with the question of what we started talking about, what were domestic violence laws? And then also, why do people go back to the assailant? Why do people back to it? So let's go first. Let's go with the domestic violence law. Where are the domestic violence laws? Why would those police allow Petito to go back with laundry after they were seen fighting, knowing, hopefully, maybe that there was a history of this, or seeing that, or whatever it is? What would that exchange be like?
So it really depends on what the police officers who responded were told, right? If there's, and like I say in every segment, I can't speak for what the laws are in every jurisdiction everywhere. What I do know in Delaware is if there's evidence of actual violence, if there's evidence that a violent act or an assault has occurred, the arrest of the offender is made mandatory under the provisions of the law. So if there's a mark on the face, if there's bruising or marks around the neck, torn shirt, some allegations that some violence occurred, or even things like aggravated menacing, which would be threatening to hurt somebody with a deadly weapon. That's still an act of violence, even though nothing physical happened. But any act of violence requires that the offender be arrested. And in some cases where it's mutual combat, sometimes both parties of domestic are arrested. But the discretion is largely for cases where actual violence has occurred. Discretion is taken out of the process, and the arrest is mandated. And what that was designed, I think, years ago by our Attorney General's office to do was to help combat what you said was pretty closely aligned with Stockholm Syndrome, right? Somebody's in a relationship with someone they depend on, maybe for their support, maybe for help with the children, maybe for their very home. They're in a relationship with someone. In the moment there's a fight happening, they call the police to help them get out of a violent situation. But then when the reality sets in, like if he or she is kicked out, if we're no longer together, that's a good bit of my support that's gone. So I think in the past people have backpedaled in some cases on helping to prosecute their abuser. Right? They've gone back and said, I won't cooperate, I won't testify, I take it back, I lied to get him arrested because I was mad with him, whatever the case may be. And so the laws that require arrest now kind of combat that, kind of prevent that from happening by saying, no, the officers will make the arrest, and on the merits of the statements that were made at that time, the Attorney General's deputies will decide whether it's prosecutable or not.
Right.
So with that said, I don't know what the officer was told at the side of that van that day, but it could be that they both agreed, we were just having an argument, people misconstrued it, he was telling me to get back in the van, I didn't want to because I was mad, but ultimately I did, I wasn't forced, I wasn't abused. If that's what the officers were told, then it's an argument. Yeah. In a lot of cases, we will still write a report for a verbal domestic or a non-criminal domestic situation, so it'll be documented, at least here, at least locally. It will be documented as something domestic occurred. Right. But no arrest is made because it doesn't rise to that level of violence.
Well, and we have to go back to it, is that I think people were pointing at the police in this case, and I think in a lot of cases, is that you should have arrested them. You should have known of what it comes out. It also, and I think that goes into the world of psychology here, is that, that we have an obligation if somebody is a danger to themselves or others, that we have to petition to put them into an involuntary commitment. But if that person does not present a danger to themselves or others, we really can't do anything. We could appeal to a colleague, we could appeal to another medical professional or whatever it is. But if the person comes in after whoever, husband, wife, mom, dad, whoever said, yes, they said they were suicidal, and I ask them, are you suicidal? And they say no, then I hold no obligation to put them in an involuntary commitment.
But just like the police in this case, if someone comes into you and they're presenting no ideation, no expression, no propensity to commit violence or suicide,
Right.
no outward signs, no symptomology, they tell you they're fine, and they're convincing, and then they leave, and you find out they've died by suicide, people are going, well, the shrink should have known.
Yeah.
The shrink should have seen those. He's trained, he's educated to see those symptoms and to see that propensity, and should have known and should have put Sam in an institution.
Right.
But Sam was good at hiding it, didn't present it, and then died by suicide, and there was nothing you could have done. It's just like the police in this case. They, I assume, acted on what they were told,
Right.
investigated, interviewed both parties, believed both parties, and didn't make an arrest, ultimately, because there's probably no allegation that a crime was committed.
Right. Now, if there was a history of domestic violence, which we understand that by people have been saying that there was probably a history of domestic violence, she was being controlled by this guy, we have to look at it. And we go back to what the Stockholm Syndrome is. It's when you basically empathize with your attacker, assailant, or your captor. And so you're empathizing with them, basically saying that, they're trying to do things in good faith for you, and so on. And we see this a lot with trafficking victims and so on. It's not, and again, we would never throw the blame to the victim. We wouldn't. We're basically saying that there's a lot of psychological injury going on here where they would come to defend their assailant, their basically their attacker. So somewhere along the line, he's controlling, he's manipulating, he's gaslighting her, and she believes that he loves her. She believes that he's the best for her. She believes he has her best interest at heart, when in fact he has none of that. Now, again, we look at it as he most likely brutally murdered her from what reports are saying, and then he went back somewhere in Florida and decided to kill himself because he wouldn't face the reality. Now, that also goes back, we see this a lot in domestic violence cases, is that there's that narcissism and arrogance that says that I'm not going to be held to the law, so I'm going to take myself out. That to me is, that's that ultimate kind of F you type of thing. You can't prosecute me, I don't care.
I'm going to decide how I go out.
So it gives the family no closure whatsoever.
I told you earlier, I would love to have heard some of the interviews.
Right.
If for nothing else, to just figure out how individuals like this operate. And this.
Well, there's a lot of them. There was, and I know this is a little bit different, but we go to the case with the Parkside school shooting. This well, he's not a kid. He's 24 now, but ended up killing all the kids and faculty at Parkside Elementary, or at Parkside High School in Florida, and he came in and admitted to the 17 murders. He in court said, yes, I did it, guilty, but somewhere along the line, who's he saying that for? Is he saying it for himself to make himself feel better?
It's almost like he's taking credit for it, right?
Yeah,
not taking responsibility for it, but taking credit for it.
Right. So, I mean, you get that. You get this with these domestic violence guys as well, is that they kind of take it almost as a badge of honor. And it's kind of wild because they won't take that responsibility. They'll take basically the easy way out. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Don't like it one bit. So we go back to it as that, and again, as just that little service announcement, if you are involved in a domestic violence situation, you should call the police. You should report the person. You should call, areas where they have resources, it's shelters and so forth.
Call the domestic violence hotlines in your area. Call the shelters in your area and see what help is available.
No.
Call your local police department, even if you've not yet reported a crime, and see what their victim services unit can do for you. They're always willing to help. people who are in need of the assistance. So
Absolutely. The other thing, and we kind of alluded to it, that, you do get a PFA or a no contact order, and people ultimately say, well, that's just a piece of paper. But it's also about the victim getting, or the survivor getting, their power back. You're doing something and telling something so that you are taking power. That this person has robbed you of a lot of things in your life. And typically they rob you of your freedoms, just to be a person. They rob you of self-respect. They rob you of self-esteem. So making that phone call is empowering. It makes you feel good. Now, say the person's never prosecuted. The person goes on happy, lives their disgusting existence or whatever it is. You still have gained power, even by making a report. And know that yes, PFAs are paper and so on and so forth. But what's behind that paper is much more. It's a feeling of power.
Reclaiming some control over the situation.
Yeah. So, again, if you're in that, make sure you call the domestic violence hotline. All right. To our new section today that we put out here. And again, you have to remember, we both absolutely love The Simpsons or The Family Guy. We absolutely love them. We do. And there was a couple of episodes of old Peter talking about what grinds his gears.
So yeah, I've got a bet going with my 11-year-old that in 50 years now, in 50 years worth of episodes of The Simpsons and The Family Guy, I can find a reference in those episodes for anything that she can possibly dream up. So far, I'm winning.
So
she hasn't stumped me yet.
So what grinds your gears comes out. So we're changing this section to what pisses us off, And again, out of all tongue in cheek, but these are things that I think are concerning. I will opt to go first because I want to. That's just kind of how it is. So maybe you've noticed, I've noticed, and we talked about it earlier about the quotas and and so forth. People are driving like freaking idiots. Like complete freaking idiots. That these are folks that I have watched lately, and not because I'm getting older in society, because we've already admitted I've texted and drove, I've already sped and all this, but it's
from horseback once.
Again, hey, I live a wild life, so. But the speeding is driving me insane at this as a point. People that are just not paying attention just literally pisses me off. So there's a couple of stretches, and if you're in the Philadelphia, Delaware area and so forth, there's 95, which goes all the way down to to Florida. Goes down to Miami, and we also have Route 1 here that goes down to the beach area from Wilmington, and we have 495, which is our Veterans Memorial Highway,
the Delaware Motor Speedway,
which the posted speed limit is 65, right? So I was in the middle lane. It's a 3-lane highway, and this was just this literally was yesterday. It was in the middle lane. Okay, I was doing like 75 because I was trying to keep up with traffic. I'm in the middle lane, for God's sakes, okay? Should nobody be beeping behind me while I'm in the middle lane, because that means that the go fast lane on the left lane is still open for the sucker to pass me. He is on my butt. Like literally, it had to be about an inch away from me, honking his horns, throwing his hands up, sirens and light. No, it wasn't a cop. I throw that out. This guy just rolled up on me and literally was losing his mind. He passes me by going on the shoulder. Literally goes past the two other cars that were in the slow lane and on the go fast lane, goes onto the shoulder, whips through the shoulder, gets in front of all of us, puts his finger out at us as he's driving. He must have hit 110 miles an hour. And I'm looking at this like, why? Are you more important than anybody else in the roadway? Do you have a death wish? And then okay, here's the shrink of me that I went back. Oh my God, maybe this is an emergency and he has to get to the hospital. But I'm thinking, no. This is what pisses me off right now.
This is what grinds your gears.
Grinds my gears.
What grinds my gears is a little less specific, but just as widespread as and I'll speak to your story a little bit, because I started noticing this in like May and June of 2020.
Okay.
When there was really, everyone was on lockdown. So there shouldn't have been very many cars on the road for the morning commute. I was still obviously going to work every morning.
Sure.
And when you got out onto the highways, the few people who were either disregarding the lockdown or maybe were also going to important necessary jobs or what have you, the traffic volume was so much less at rush hour that the driving on the highways during that period of time was out of control. It's as though the traffic laws didn't exist. Talking on the phone, texting, speeds of 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. I mean, it was chaos out there because they had room to do it now because the volume was so much lower, but also because I think at the time they were of the impression that the police were told, limit your contact with people, don't pull over cars, you'll expose yourself, things like that. So it was like for a period of time, the law had been canceled. And that was what was grinding my gears in April of May of 2020. What grinds my gears today is that the law is actually being canceled for people.
That's very true. Right? Very true.
You see in places in California, we talked about this in an earlier episode, where it's been discouraged now. Police are being discouraged from arresting people for shoplifting or for petty theft, for car theft. We talked about Austin, Texas, where the chief of police had to put out a list of things that he no longer had the staffing to respond to. And now we find out in Philadelphia, we're gonna ban an entire classification of traffic enforcement. Now, you can't go out and enforce the traffic laws in a congested city, in what's the 5th largest city in the U.S. Yep. You can't enforce traffic laws in a very pedestrian city that's very congested with traffic. We can't enforce things like red lights and speeding and lane changes and turns on red, where you could actually put people in danger, but we're not going to enforce those laws because politics. Right. I mean, so that's what grinds my gears is now early on we had the perception that the law had been canceled, and I was angry at the people who were doing it. Right. My anger has shifted now. Now I'm becoming upset with the people who are permitting it, who are openly and by policy making permitting flaunting the laws.
Well, and they're also, and we talked about that before, is that the police officer is just the enforcer of that law, is the legal arm of the law.
If the politicians don't want the laws that exist, it's their job. It's their whole career to change the laws. We're the executive arm. We go out and enforce the laws that they put in the books. If they don't like the laws in the books, set to changing them. Make speeding legal in Philadelphia. Take down all the red lights and put up yield signs at every intersection. I don't care.
So let's go to that speeding issue again. Is that, just in the past couple of weeks here in the Delaware Valley, we have had numerous pedestrians struck on the highways. And when you look at it, speed and careless driving were all involved in every single one of them.
So we've had a pretty epidemic number of fatal accidents on that Route 1 that you talked about. And for people not familiar with Delaware, it's a 3-lane road in most areas and 2 in others. And the speeds that are posted are usually 65, except through the smaller towns. And 65 is like, to some people, sort of the minimum speed, right? Everyone needs to do 80, 85, 90. And if you look, we've had a rash of fatal collisions on Route 1. And if you look at the news reports, if you look at the police reports, speed is a factor. And if we have people crossing over a 30-foot grass median and coming out the other side and having head-on fatal collisions, if you're doing 65, that's less likely than if you're doing 85.
Right. And, so let's let speeding occur. Let's let these traffic violations occur. And this is all in responsive. When we talked about this, in inner cities now, we're starting to see unlicensed drivers on unlicensed vehicles, ATVs, dirt bikes, and so forth, that are paying attention to no laws and no traffic, anything. But yet people are yelling back saying, well, this is culture. And because it's inner city culture, we should allow these things to happen.
Right. So instead of making people take responsibility for their own bad conduct, now we're saying, well, the police are picking on people by arresting them for these low-level offenses. They're arresting people or ticketing people for these traffic offenses. They're just picking on people. So instead of making people responsible for their own conduct, they've moved the scapegoat again. And then the scapegoat is back to being that traffic cop who is out there ultimately with the goal of safety, with the goal of public safety in mind by enforcing these traffic laws. But public safety isn't their concern, right? It's perception that's their concern. And if we're sending the cops out there to enforce laws against these poor, unsuspecting breakers of the law, must be the cops' fault.
Because you were driving an unlicensed vehicle on the sidewalk while doing a wheelie through the areas that we've been seeing with the outside dining, everybody else is at fault besides you. It literally makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense to allow this continue. But somewhere along the line, people are making sense of it. They're rationalizing it. They're also defending it.
Politicians are. Let's not call them people.
I think people along, because if you go in and say, okay, well, we're going to get rid of all the ATVs and the dirt bikes that are unlicensed with unlicensed and uninsured people driving them, then there's a certain section of the society and of culture that says, now you're picking on us. Now you're pointing us out. Well, yeah, because you're breaking the law.
We're picking on your conduct, which is our job. Our job is to find illegal conduct and pick on it.
That was, I forget, it was either Nicodemus Scarfa or one of the mob bosses had said, because of the RICO Act, because Rudy Giuliani was taken down the mall, he was destroying Italian-American culture. No, you were destroying the mob.
Right. You're destroying Italian-American criminal enterprise.
Yeah, you're destroying people that ultimately are preying on their own people. It starts becoming just ridiculous.
I'm sure the people who are paying protection money so they could open their business every morning saw it differently.
Yeah. I like this section. Man, this gets us fired up for the week. Oh my God, I like this. We're keeping this. Denny, make a mark of it. We're keeping it. Got it? Cool.
Happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween. Now go out, get offended, and don't speed anyway. So it's a very good section, my friend.
Had a good time tonight.
I liked it. All right. So, hey, make sure you listen to The Cop and the Shrink. Make sure you go to thecopandtheshrink.com. Check out the survivorsfoundation.com as well when you're at it, or .org. And also check out the merch. It's pretty cool. We even have like face masks if you're wearing a face mask and you're still, in the world that you are mandated a face mask. We actually have 3-ply face masks. We got some cool stuff, man. So just go to thecopandtheshrink.com for the merch section with that. But also check us out, watch us, share us with friends. And we will be back next time with our new section and a couple other things. Thanks a lot for listening.